You need to be careful about Vanessa. My grandmother warned me over dinner at her sprawling estate. Her hands, weathered by 92 years but still steady, clasped mine across the antique oak table. I've seen how she looks at you when she thinks no one's watching. That girl isn't in love with you, Alex. She's in love with what you represent. I pulled my hands away, feeling the familiar irritation rise. For 2 months, Grandma Rose had been making these comments about my fiancé, and I was tired of defending our relationship. Grandma, not everyone is a gold digger, I said, trying to keep my voice patient. Vanessa loves me for who I am. She didn't even know about the family money when we met. Grandma Rose raised one perfectly arched eyebrow, a skill she'd mastered over nearly a century of seeing through people's facades. Is that what she told you? That she had no idea the Harringtons own half of Boston's waterfront properties and have a foundation with their name on it. We met at a charity event for underprivileged kids. I explained for what felt like the 100th time. She was volunteering just like me. At a gala hosted by the Harrington Foundation, Grandma pointed out, wearing a dress that cost more than most people's monthly rent while volunteering. She has her own money, I defended. Her design business is doing well. So well that she needed to move into your penthouse within 3 months of dating. Grandma Rose sighed, her eyes softening. Alex, I'm not trying to ruin your happiness. I just don't want you to make the same mistake your father made with Clarissa. I flinched at the mention of my stepmother, who had indeed divorced my father after 5 years, walking away with a settlement that had made headlines in the Boston Globe. But Vanessa wasn't Clarissa. My fiancé was warm, supportive, and genuinely interested in my work at the foundation, work that had nothing to do with the family fortune. Vanessa isn't like that, I insisted. Besides, I'm not Dad. I can tell when someone is being genuine. Grandma Rose looked unconvinced. Perhaps you can, but humor an old woman and consider a small test. A test? I repeated. What kind of test? Nothing drastic, she said, a familiar glint of mischief in her eyes. Just a little scenario to see Vanessa's true colors. I should have walked away then. Should have dismissed my grandmother's concerns as the paranoia of a woman who had seen too many people try to get close to her family for the wrong reasons. Instead, I leaned forward. What did you have in mind? 2 weeks later, I was beginning to regret agreeing to Grandma Rose's plan. Vanessa and I were having dinner at Maison Laurent, the 5-star French restaurant where I proposed 6 months earlier. I'd been distracted all evening, mentally rehearsing the script Grandma Rose had helped me prepare. Alex, are you okay? Vanessa asked, reaching across the table to touch my hand. Her engagement ring, a 5-carat diamond that had been in my family for generations, caught the light. You've barely touched your food. This was it, the moment of truth. Actually, I began, lowering my voice. I've had some unsettling news. Concern immediately filled her eyes. What is it? Is someone sick? No, nothing like that, I assured her. It's about the family business. Vanessa leaned closer, her voice dropping to match mine. What about it? There's been a significant loss, I said, watching her face carefully. A major investment went bad, really bad. The lawyers say we might lose almost everything. For a moment, Vanessa's expression froze. Then she squeezed my hand. Oh, Alex, that's terrible. But it's just money, right? We still have each other. I felt a wave of relief, followed immediately by guilt for testing her this way. Right, of course. But it might mean some major changes. The penthouse, the summer house in the Hamptons, even my position at the foundation. It could all be gone. Wow, Vanessa said, her eyes widening slightly as she processed this. That's a lot to take in, but we'll figure it out together. Maybe I can take on more design clients. My business has been growing, and with some extra effort, I could probably double my income. Her reaction seemed genuine, and I felt increasingly uncomfortable with the deception. Maybe Grandma Rose was wrong. Maybe I should end this charade now and come clean. But something in Vanessa's eyes, a calculation, a slight reservation, made me continue. There's one more thing, I added. My grandmother, she saw this coming somehow. She moved some assets into a separate trust years ago. The lawyers say it's protected, but what? Vanessa prompted, leaning forward. She's threatening to write me out of her will if I don't break off our engagement. I finished, the lie tasting bitter on my tongue. She's convinced you're only with me for the money, And now she wants me to prove my loyalty to the family by choosing the Harrington legacy over our future together. Vanessa sat back, her face flushing with indignation. She can't do that. We're getting married in 3 months. I know, I said, trying to sound distraught. I told her I wouldn't do it, that we're in love and I don't care about the money. But Vanessa, we're talking about nearly $100 million. The last secure part of the family fortune. Vanessa was quiet for several long moments, staring at her untouched dessert. When she finally spoke, her voice was carefully measured. What exactly are you saying, Alex? That you're considering breaking up with me because your grandmother is blackmailing you? No, I said quickly. I'm saying we need to figure this out together. Maybe we postpone the wedding until this financial crisis is sorted, or we could elope quietly, without telling her. Postpone the wedding, Vanessa repeated, her voice rising slightly before she controlled it. After all the planning we've done, it would just be temporary, I assured her. Once things settle down financially, we can have the celebration we planned. Vanessa took a sip of her wine, her eyes calculating over the rim of the glass. And if we elope, would your grandmother still cut you off? Probably, I admitted. She's pretty adamant. So either way, we're looking at living on my design income and whatever you can make outside the family business, she clarified. For now, yes, I said. But I have my MBA. I could find a decent job. We have to downsize significantly, but we'd make it work. Vanessa was silent again, and I could practically see the wheels turning behind her eyes. Finally, she reached across the table and took both my hands in hers. Alex, I love you and I want to marry you. But I also don't want to be the reason you lose your inheritance. That's too much pressure on our relationship. What are you saying? I asked, though I was beginning to see where this was heading. Maybe, she paused, looking down at our joined hands. Maybe your grandmother is right. Not about me being a gold digger, she added quickly, but about us needing more time. If we postpone the wedding, you won't lose your inheritance and we can take time to build our own financial security. So do you want to stay engaged but delay the wedding indefinitely? I clarified. Just until your grandmother comes around, or until the situation changes, she said delicately. I understood what she wasn't saying. Until Grandma Rose died and I received my inheritance. And if she never changes her mind? I pressed. If the choice is always between you and the money. Vanessa withdrew her hands, her smile tight. Let's not be dramatic, Alex. Your grandmother is 92. The situation will resolve itself eventually. The coldness of that statement hit me like a slap. I stared at the woman I'd been planning to spend my life with, suddenly seeing her through my grandmother's eyes. I see, I said quietly. You know, it's funny. I told my grandmother she was wrong about you. I defended your character, your intentions. I was so sure she was being paranoid. Vanessa's expression shifted to wariness. What are you talking about? There is no financial crisis, I said flatly. The family fortune is secure. My grandmother isn't threatening to disinherit me. It was a test, Vanessa, and you just failed spectacularly. Her face drained of color. A test? You've been testing me? My grandmother suggested it, I admitted. I didn't want to believe her concerns, but I agreed to find out for sure. Anger replaced shock on her features. So you lied to me, manipulated me, and you have the nerve to judge my reaction? I'm not proud of it, I said honestly. But I'm grateful for the clarity. You just made it very clear that you're willing to postpone our marriage indefinitely while waiting for my 92-year-old grandmother to die so you can access my inheritance. That's not fair, Vanessa protested, though her flush of guilt suggested otherwise. You put me in an impossible position. Did I? Because I think the position was actually quite simple. Do you love me enough to marry me without the guarantee of family money? Apparently the answer is no. Vanessa gathered her purse, her movements jerky with suppressed rage. I'm not having this conversation in a public restaurant after you deliberately humiliated me. We'll talk when you've calmed down and realize how paranoid and unfair you're being. She stormed out, leaving me alone with the check and the uncomfortable realization that Grandma Rose had been right all along. I didn't hear from Vanessa for 3 days. No calls, no texts, no errant visits to the penthouse she still technically lived in but had been conspicuously absent from. On the 4th day, my assistant informed me that someone named Drake had called the foundation office looking for me. The name meant nothing, but the message sent a chill down my spine. He said to tell you that if you want to know the truth about Vanessa Clark, you should meet him at the Harbor Pub tonight at 8. Against my better judgment, I went. The Harbor Pub wasn't the kind of place you'd find at Harrington. It was dimly lit, smelled of stale beer, and catered to the working-class folks who maintained the yachts rather than those who owned them. Perfect for a conversation you didn't want overheard in Boston's elite social circles. A man in his early 30s, with the worn look of someone who'd seen harder times than I ever would, waved me over to a corner booth. "Alex Harrington, I'm Drake Wilson." I slid into the booth, declining his offer of a beer. "My assistant said you have information about Vanessa." "Yeah, you could say that." Drake's smile was bitter, considering I was engaged to her too, about 3 years ago. A cold weight settled in my stomach. "What? Vanessa Clark, right? Petite, dark hair, big blue eyes, fashion designer with her own little studio." At my nod, he continued, "Yeah, that's my Van. Or she was until she met Jeffrey Pullman at a charity gala. Real estate developer, old family money. Sound familiar?" "She was engaged to you?" I repeated, still processing this information. "For 8 months," Drake confirmed. "We met when she was just starting her design business. I'm a contractor, helped her renovate her first studio space. Fell hard for her, proposed after a year. She said yes, moved in with me, started planning this elaborate wedding." "What happened?" "Pullman happened. Suddenly Van was all about postponing the wedding, needing space to think, but not actually breaking up. Kept the ring, kept her stuff at my place, but was spending most nights elsewhere. When I confronted her, she claimed she needed time to focus on her business." "And you found out about Pullman?" Drake nodded, taking a swig of his beer. "Through a buddy who worked security at some of those fancy events. Showed me pictures of them together. When I confronted her again, she finally admitted it, said she found a connection she couldn't ignore." His laugh was hollow. 2 months later, she was wearing Pullman's ring, living in his mansion in Cambridge. "What happened with Pullman?" I asked, though I was starting to see the pattern. "From what I heard, they were together about a year. Then he had some financial setbacks, nothing catastrophic, but enough that the massive wedding they'd been planning had to be scaled back. Suddenly Vanessa discovered that they had rushed into things and needed space. Returned the ring via courier and was spotted at the Gardner Museum fundraiser the next week, scoping out her next target." Drake leaned forward. "That was you, wasn't it? The Gardner event last spring." I nodded numbly, remembering how Vanessa had approached me at the bar, commenting on my donation speech with such seemingly genuine admiration. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked finally. Drake shrugged. "Heard through the grapevine that she was engaged to a Harrington. Figured you should know what you're dealing with. I'd have appreciated a warning before she took a year of my life." After verifying Drake's story through some discreet inquiries, I called my grandmother. Her satisfaction at being right was tempered by genuine concern for me. "I'm sorry, Alex. I truly am. I took no pleasure in being correct about her." "I know, Grandma," I sighed. "But how do I handle this? She still has most of her things at my place, including the ring." There was a long pause, then Grandma Rose said, "I might have an idea. Something that will ensure Vanessa Clark never tries this scheme again, with you or anyone else." My grandmother's plan was elegant in its simplicity, requiring just a few strategic phone calls and one more deception, which seemed fair, given the circumstances. 3 days later, Vanessa finally returned to the penthouse. She entered using her key, calling out tentatively, "Alex, can we talk?" I was waiting in the living room, looking appropriately contrite. "Vanessa, I was beginning to think you weren't coming back." She set down her purse, her expression a perfect blend of hurt and forgiveness. "I needed time to process the fact that you didn't trust me. That was deeply painful." "I know," I said softly, "and you're right. I should have trusted my instincts about you, not my grandmother's suspicions." Vanessa sat beside me on the sofa, taking my hands in hers. "We've both made mistakes. Let's put this behind us and focus on our future." "Actually," I said, "that's what I wanted to talk to you about. Our future has changed significantly in the last few days." Wariness crept into her eyes. "What do you mean?" "My grandmother had a stroke 2 days ago," I lied, watching her face carefully. "She's stable, but the doctors aren't optimistic about her recovery." "Oh, Alex," Vanessa gasped, embracing me. "I'm so sorry." "Thank you," I said, patting her back. "But there's more." The family lawyers came to the hospital yesterday. Apparently, Grandma Rose had already signed the paperwork to transfer most of her estate directly to me, bypassing the usual inheritance process. They just needed her to review it one last time, but with her condition, I trailed off. Vanessa pulled back, her eyes wide. What does that mean exactly? It means, I said slowly, that I'm now the primary executor and beneficiary of the Rose Harrington estate. The transfer of assets has already begun. Assets? Vanessa repeated, a gleam of interest she couldn't quite disguise lighting her eyes. The Rose Harrington Trust is worth approximately $340 million, I said, naming a figure that was actually less than half the true amount. And now it's mine to manage. Vanessa was quiet for a moment, processing this information. Then she squeezed my hands. This is a lot of responsibility to take on while you're grieving. But I'll be right here beside you, supporting you through it all. Will you? I asked, my voice soft. Of course, she assured me, brushing her lips against mine. We're partners, remember? For better or worse. I kissed her back briefly, then stood and walked to the window overlooking the Boston skyline. You know, it's funny. A week ago, when I thought I might lose everything, you were suggesting we postpone our wedding indefinitely. That was a misunderstanding, Vanessa said quickly. I was just trying to respect your family's wishes. And now, I turned to face her. Now that my grandmother is incapacitated and I've inherited her fortune, you're suddenly ready to stand by my side again? Vanessa's expression hardened slightly. You're twisting my words, Alex. I've always wanted to marry you. Always? I challenged. Or just since you discovered who the Harringtons were? Tell me, Vanessa, did you approach me at the Gardner Museum fundraiser by chance? Or was I carefully selected after Jeffrey Pullman's financial situation changed? The color drained from her face. Who told you about Jeffrey? Does it matter? I also know about Drake Wilson, and probably a few others I haven't discovered yet. I moved closer to her. How long were you going to wait this time, Vanessa? Until after the wedding. Until you could secure a substantial divorce settlement. She stood abruptly, her facade cracking. You don't understand anything. Do you know how hard it is for a woman to establish herself in this world? To build security? I grew up with nothing, fighting for every opportunity. So that justifies targeting men for their money? Pretending to love them. I never said I didn't care for you, she countered. But love doesn't pay the bills, Alex. You wouldn't understand that, having never worried about money a day in your life. You're right, I acknowledged. I've been incredibly privileged. But that doesn't excuse lying and manipulation. Vanessa gathered her composure, straightening her shoulders. We clearly have different perspectives on this, but the situation has changed now. We can start fresh, be honest with each other. Actually, I said, I don't think we can. Because there's one more thing you should know. My grandmother never had a stroke. The estate hasn't been transferred. It was another test, Vanessa. And once again, you failed. Her expression contorted with rage. You manipulative bastard, you set me up. I gave you a chance to prove my grandmother wrong, I corrected. Twice. Both times you made your priorities crystal clear. Fine, she snapped, grabbing her purse. Keep your money and your paranoid games. There are plenty of other men in Boston. About that, I said calmly, you might find the social circuit less welcoming than you expect. You see, my grandmother made a few calls after we learned about your history with Drake and Jeffrey. Just casual conversations with her friends, women who chair every major charity board and gala committee in New England. Vanessa froze, her knuckles white around her purse strap. Boston's social world is smaller than you think, I continued. And my grandmother has been its unofficial gatekeeper for decades. By tomorrow, every wealthy family from here to Providence will know exactly who Vanessa Clark is and how she operates. You wouldn't, she whispered. That's my livelihood, my reputation. Actually, my grandmother already did. Protecting other families from your particular brand of career planning seemed like the responsible thing to do. Vanessa's carefully constructed poise finally shattered. You'll regret this, she hissed. Both of you. I have text messages, emails, proof that you set me up. I could sue for emotional distress, defamation. You could, I agreed. But discovery works both ways, Vanessa. Are you sure you want your pattern of targeting wealthy men exposed in court? The detailed testimony from Drake and Jeffrey about how you operated. The financial records showing how your design business was actually losing money while you portrayed it as successful. Her silence was answer enough. The engagement ring belongs to my family, I said quietly. Please leave it on the entry table on your way out. You have until Friday to collect your things from the penthouse. Anything remaining will be donated. Without another word, Vanessa yanked the ring from her finger, slammed it on the table with enough force to nick the marble surface, and stormed out. 6 months later, I was having Sunday dinner with Grandma Rose at her estate, a tradition we'd maintained religiously since the Vanessa debacle. Rebecca seems lovely, Grandma observed, referring to the pediatric surgeon I'd recently started dating, whom I'd met through normal channels at a hospital fundraiser, with no orchestration from my grandmother. Smart, accomplished, and absolutely no interest in the Harrington name or fortune. She didn't even know who we were until our third date, I confirmed, smiling at the memory of Rebecca's embarrassment when she realized who my family was. She's the real deal. I know, Grandma Rose said with a satisfied nod. I didn't have to test this one, though I did have Simmons run a discreet background check, just to be thorough. She named her longtime butler and right-hand man. Grandma. I protested, though I wasn't really surprised. Don't grandma me, she retorted. After what happened with Vanessa, a little caution is warranted. Besides, the check came back spotless. Rebecca Winters comes from a middle-class family in Worcester, put herself through medical school, and has dedicated her career to pediatric oncology. She donates 15% of her income to cancer research and has no suspicious relationship patterns. I shook my head, amused despite myself. Has anyone ever told you that you missed your calling as a private investigator? Who says I missed it? Grandma Rose's eyes twinkled. How do you think I've kept this family's reputation intact for 7 decades? Certainly not by being naive about people's intentions. I raised my wine glass in acknowledgement. To your wisdom, then. I should have listened sooner. You listened when it counted, she said, her expression softening. And you learned a valuable lesson that will serve you well when you eventually take stewardship of the family legacy. That people can be deceptive and greedy. I asked. That true character reveals itself under pressure, she corrected. In comfort and prosperity, anyone can appear virtuous. It's what people do when faced with loss or hardship that shows you who they really are. As we continued our dinner, I reflected on how close I'd come to making a catastrophic mistake with Vanessa. The woman I thought loved me had only loved what I represented: status, security, wealth. And she'd been willing to wait indefinitely for my elderly grandmother to die to secure it. I'd learned that money, while providing comfort and opportunity, also complicates human connections. It can mask genuine affection and distort relationships in ways that aren't always immediately obvious. But I'd also learned something about myself. Despite growing up with every privilege, I valued truth and authenticity more than status or appearance. And thanks to my grandmother's wisdom, meddling as it sometimes seemed, I'd discovered that principle before making a mistake I couldn't undo. By the way, Grandma Rose said casually, interrupting my thoughts, I ran into Vanessa Clark last week. I nearly choked on my wine. What? Where? At Bergdorf's. She's working as a sales associate in the designer section. Grandma sipped her water calmly. Apparently, her design business suffered some unexpected setbacks after our little intervention. She wasn't pleased to see me. I imagine not, I said, feeling a pang of something, not quite regret, but acknowledgement of how dramatically Vanessa's life had changed. Do you ever feel bad about what we did? Grandma Rose set down her glass, her expression serious. Do I regret protecting my grandson from a woman who saw him as nothing more than an ATM with a familiar last name? Who was willing to wait for me to die so she could access my money? Not for a moment. She patted my hand. We didn't ruin Vanessa Clark. We simply ensured she couldn't ruin anyone else the way she planned to ruin you. As harsh as it sounded, I knew she was right. The inheritance trap Vanessa had set for me had ultimately snapped shut on her instead. And while I took no pleasure in her downfall, I was profoundly grateful for the wisdom that had saved me from making what would have been the most expensive mistake of my life, financially and emotionally. Now, Grandma Rose said, returning to her usual brisk efficiency, when are you bringing Rebecca for dinner? I want to meet this girl properly. Soon? I promise, smiling at her transparent attempt to move my love life forward. But no tests this time, Grandma. No fake financial crisis or stroke scenarios. She raised her hand in a solemn vow. No tests. But I reserve the right to ask invasive questions. It's a grandmother's prerogative. I laughed, raising my glass again. I wouldn't have it any other way.